Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on applying ICS and Risk Management successfully in your enterprise. If any questions happen to come up during the course of the webinar, you can type them up and send them to us at any point. We will go over them at the end, address them if there's any time left, and if not, we'll follow up with you over email in the next couple of days. All of the participants in today's webinar are listed as anonymous, only the host and the presenter's names will be made visible. Last but not least, it's important to know that this webinar is going to be recorded and the link to the recording will be sent to you via email in case you want to revisit it and watch it again in the future. That being said, without any further ado, let me introduce myself and our presenter for today. My name is Michael Kamberoff and I'm a sales consultant in the headquarters of the BOC Group in Vienna, Austria. And I'll be your host for today. Our speaker is going to be Tom Brennan. He's part of our global business development team and he's based in the Irish office of the BOC Group. Tom is a senior consultant and an expert in both business process management and enterprise architecture. Once more, we would like to welcome you to today's webinar. Just before we start talking about internal control systems and risk management, let me give you some background information about our company as well as some quick facts and figures. The BOC Group was originally founded in 1995 as a spin-off of the University of Vienna and is today a leading international manufacturer of software tools for globally recognized management approaches. Through constant innovation and the improvement of established processes within our organization, we ensure the strong continuity of the development of both our software and our service offerings. The BOC Group is headquartered in Vienna, Austria, but our operations span worldwide through offices in Ireland, Germany, Greece, Spain, Poland, Switzerland, and France. As you can see on this slide here, we have over 1,000 clients in more than 50 countries, numerous partners as well from all over the world. We have a constantly growing community of now over 85,000 people, and over the course of now more than 20 years, we have successfully executed more than 5,000 projects with our user base, with our clients and our partners. The BOC Group is presented by two major products, and those are ADONIS, which focuses on business process management, and ADOIT, which is centered around enterprise architecture. Both products also offer comprehensive functionalities that relate to governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, which as a field on its own offers methods and mechanisms for the evaluation and successful analysis of your risk portfolio. Our products can operate both on-premise and as a software as a service. If you're more interested in the particular type of offering, you can find more information about it on the website. Expanding on our tools and how they relate to these three major fields, in the following management areas displayed that you can see on the slide, the BOC Group happens to not only be a tool manufacturer, but also quite an experienced consulting company. So other than our two major products, we also offer extensive consulting services as well as trainings. The products of the BOC Management Office, ADONIS and ADOIT, that are used in the base scenarios to usually model business processes or enterprise architectures can also be used to document and maintain the risk portfolio and the application landscape of the organization, which again directly relates to GRC. So for example, considering that the stakeholders in the organization that are responsible for the GRC and that are using ADOIT or ADONIS, they might be interested in, let's say, whether or not the firm is compliant with different ISO standards for production companies or different regulatory requirements for banks and insurance companies, regardless of what the organization is and regardless of what the industry and the type of business the company operates in. With GRC and the way it's related to both ADONIS and ADOIT, the stakeholders in the organization responsible for these activities can achieve those goals and ensure the company's living up to these expectations and to all these standards. The different roles and the stakeholders from the organization that have these different responsibilities and also responsibilities in regards to the process architecture and the repository are able to conduct multiple evaluation and analysis techniques within the tools in order to, in the end, better manage risk and effectively exercise internal control, as well as prepare the company for audits. So these are two topics that we're definitely going to jump in today's webinar. The webinar today on ICS and Risk Management falls in 2 out of the 6 categories of the BOC webinars for 2017, and you can see them on the slide. We will provide you with more information about all the topics and the related webinars at the end of today's session. That being said, and without any further ado, I will now pass on the mic to our presenter for today, Tom. All right, thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for the introduction. I'm just going to show my screen here. So I'd also like to wish everyone a warm welcome to today's session where we're going to talk about risk management. So we're going to look at some of the reasons why you have to have an internal control system to deal with operational risk management. We will discuss our target model for operational risk management together with a framework and a best practice approach for actually applying the framework to your organization. So we'll take a look at some maturity levels that exist and what you need to do to progress from one to the next level. And we'll look at what stakeholders are involved and how it can also be integrated with some other management approaches as well. So we'll finally take a quick look into ADONIS NP, looking at the additional GRC service that is available directly in the tool via a live demo. So when we talk about operational risk management, it's defined as a continual kind of cyclic process which includes both risk assessment, risk decision making and implementation of risk controls, which result in the acceptance, mitigation and hopefully the avoidance of risk in the end. So to look at the internal control systems and risk management, we're going to use the game of chess as our analogy today. So firstly we're going to look at the rules of the game, see why we actually need to address ICS and risk management at all, and what the actual objectives are of the risk game. So there are many factors that influence our decision in implementing an internal control system and having a requirement for the GRC service that BOC offers. So as the risks are typically related to our existing business processes, one trigger that could be there will be to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of our operational business activities. You may want to implement a risk management framework based on your industry, such as COSO 2 or one of the ISO standards for risk management like ISO 31000. You may have some legal regulations or requirements that you would like to comply with, or a specific standard or specification in terms of risk management like Solvency 2 or Basel 2 and 3. You could also need to remove or really try to mitigate any risks when it comes to preparing for audit and to ensure that all of your financial reporting is above board and correct. Or you may want to just secure your company's assets to make sure that they're sustainable for the future. And lastly, you just want to avoid any of the general hazards or risks to your business. So these are just some of the key factors that influence a decision to go with risk management or internal control system. And the four cornerstones that we have of our suggested target model for operational risk management are addressed here. So we have got regulatory compliance, as I mentioned, or increasing the effectiveness of our operational processes, securing the company assets and really relying then in terms of accuracy and reliability of your financial reporting. So why is operational risk management important? Some of the laws or frameworks that you may have to comply with, again mentioning the ISO 27000 for information security, or the BC BS 239, which is from the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, or we've got EU data protection around the protection of personal data. So all of these will have an impact on your risk management and internal control systems to ensure that you're compliant. The second cornerstone would be to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of our operational processes, looking at rights and regulations, but also on the completeness of all recorded and transactions and events. We could also look at securing your company's assets to ensure the survival of your company. Risks that would include both internal or external fraud. You could have money laundering or embezzlement and corruption. And from a risk perspective in terms of quality, time and costs, you also need to have your financial reporting as accurate as possible to really be able to rely on the deliverables when it does come around to audit time. So moving on, we just need to take a look at the kind of tactics that we would like to apply in terms of operational risk. So in other words, the kind of method or model that we have sitting behind our GRC service and really the kind of concept behind it. So our best practice approach for operational risk is outlined here on this slide. And the first step we need to consider is just looking at all of your company's assets in terms of, the products or processes, employee skills and maybe their roles or IT systems and the required infrastructure that you have, and all the related documentation related to kind of external partners or your suppliers. So first of all, we need to find out what our company assets are. And then the next step is to map the the kind of risks that you have to the various assets that we mentioned. And this is done through a kind of a categorization by business areas broken down into financial, operational, compliance, legal, and IT. So here, this is where we go to the next step of actually defining and describing the risk, what risks are there, where are they found, and also what impacts they're going to have. So once we have the risks defined, we need to actually assign some controls where possible, and then define the initiatives that we know we need to employ in order to mitigate the known risks, to both improve the processes and also to reduce the associated risks by trying to embed the kind of risk mitigation within the organization. So each of these three elements that we have here are then linked back to the associated assets. So to try and get a kind of a clear picture of the potential impacts that it may have to all of the relevant stakeholders. So the result here is a kind of a value-added closed circuit, starting from the risk identification through to embedding the mitigation as defined by the controls and the initiatives. So the final and the kind of third and final dimension of the method addresses the actual kind of the procedural model that we have. So we need to have a way of keeping track of everything and making sure that we try and improve and increase our maturity over time in terms of the effectiveness of our internal control system. And so it's a similar kind of life cycle approach like the kind of plan, do, check, act cycle. But in this case, we've named the phases here as capture, evaluate or assess, operationalize, analyze, report, and obviously then try and improve at the end. So as a result, the risks and the controls are kind of firstly captured in line with the defined focus. So what area of the business are you trying to focus on? Then evaluated against the associated company assets. So as part of the evaluation, we're going to consider the risk portfolio according to certain defined criteria and dimensions that you're trying to assess and test the controls for their effectiveness, how well they're designed, what's the operating effectiveness of the controls. Then they're obviously executed and put into action to see how they perform in a real-life scenario before they're analysed, reported onto the interested stakeholders, and then we need to look to actually put the plans and initiative in place to make sure that in the next cycle we kind of improve over time, and round by round we kind of increase the maturity and both discover and hopefully close any gaps that can be exploited in terms of any kind of opportunities or potential to improve. So the final results that we have from this whole kind of framework then are used for both reporting in terms of operational risk, but also for audits or any kind of desired certification. Okay, so where do we start? So like in the game of chess, it takes a long time before you're going to be considered a chess grandmaster, but obviously it'll all be worth it in the end. So in order to evaluate and develop the operational risk management system, we need to have some kind of a maturity model to be able to kind of determine its effectiveness and also to assess its kind of quality over time. So we have 5 different maturity levels. Level 1 being an unreliable state where there's basically no documented controls in place, and only under certain circumstances the existing controls can actually be relied on, but there's nothing kind of formal in place. The next step is actually level 2, which is called the informal level, where there are some known controls but they have not yet been standardized. The controls are rarely executed, and it's heavily reliant on kind of certain individuals and their kind of skills and knowledge in order to do so. So it's not widespread across the organization. Moving on, we get to level 3, which is the standardized level in terms of maturity, meaning that simple procedures and of the internal control system have been defined, processes are documented, responsibilities have been assigned, and the initial risk and control definition and the documentation of that is finished, and there has been some kind of upskilling and training for the employees involved. Level 4, which is more of a secure level, meaning that there's a kind of a detailed description of the basic processes. Control activities are regularly reviewed and they're traceable in terms of auditing as well. And the control is continuously improved and adapted based on the latest risk, and most importantly, the documentation is maintained and kept up to date, so it's easy for anybody to see what's happened over time in terms of the risks and their associated controls. The system is also monitored by a formal ICS officer, so there needs to be a specific role in your organization. And at this stage, you're already quite mature if you've got to the stage of a level 4. But the highest level we have is what we call optimized in level 5, meaning that all ICS activities have been harmonized with the other control functions within the organization, and risk management and internal control system is really integrated. So it's just part of the one system together with tool support, which allows for the kind of quick or rapid adaptation to any changing conditions in terms of your risk portfolio. So to actually meet the requirements or to have a formal risk management system in place, you must achieve at least a level 3. So that's the standardized level in terms of maturity. So levels 1 and 2 aren't sufficient, as the traceability or transparency of the control activities are not there. So it's not possible to actually control it or to trace it in terms of auditing. So in order to kind of meet the minimum requirements, it should be a level 3 as your goal. So in order to achieve such a level of maturity, certain steps must be followed kind of year on year, and it's a step progression. So in order to achieve the first step on the ladder, you must get to a minimum level of 3, as I mentioned, where everything is defined and documented and the employees are aware of the risk management initiative, and that each of the company asset owners are able to follow in the initial kind of phases as I outlined in the framework to be able to capture their risks associated with the assets they're responsible for, to assess them and relate the risks then to the assets, as I said. So then year on year or round after round of dealing with the risk management topic, you try and achieve the next step on the ladder, where you are performing kind of an ongoing evaluation of the defined risks and controls so that you get to this maturity level of 4. And we're again following the life cycle framework and beginning to kind of operationalize and analyze, report and improve on the current state of our risk portfolio. And then once operationalization and integration is complete, you can actually achieve the level 5 where you're optimized. So this is where there's harmonization across all the functions, and there's tool support available to support the key kind of stakeholders and employees. So all of the roles and responsibilities are defined, but there's also tool support to provide maybe notifications or a kind of a specific workflow to move through the various stages of our framework here as you go from documentation to have it really kind of operationalized and integrated and embedded within the kind of culture of your organization. So who should be involved? Again, we look back to the game of chess. We consider a multiplayer game of chess where there's going to be different game variations or interactions and responsibilities. So in terms of enterprise-wide operational risk management, there's going to be a lot of players involved, so many departments and business areas like process management or compliance management or business continuity management will all be involved, and each will have a different perspective when it comes to risk. We've got certain types of risks like the strategic, market, financial or reporting risks, and each of the various stakeholders from each department should be responsible for both capturing and assessing the risks that they're actually the owners of or where they're actually assigned responsibility. So in order to manage these interactions from all of the different stakeholders, we've broken it down into what we call the 3 lines of defense. So the first line of defense is what we call operational asset management. So here is where each individual will determine what assets they are responsible for, like we saw earlier here in the framework, so from processes to activities to documents or IT systems. And they will have to be able to check how each of these assets that they're responsible for are affected by the risks that are defined, and also consider which business process it also affects. So each asset owner is responsible for their own risks individually. And the second line of defense is actually having a risk management department in your organization. So it's more of a kind of a strategic approach, and it's up to the risk management department to actually perform the ongoing assessment of all risks. So from an operational asset management point of view, it's the individual who's responsible, but this is our kind of a second check on the risk management initiative as a whole. And the risk management department should be carrying out independent testing of all of the defined controls and reporting on the results then to the necessary stakeholders. So the third and final line of defense is the involvement of actual external auditors. Initiatives here will need to be defined, and all of the content that is documented and maintained by both the first and second lines of defense should be used here by the external auditors. So that means that both the individual responsibles and the risk management team should make sure that all of the documentation and all of the history of the risks, the controls, the testing, the execution should all be available, so that when the external auditors come in, they can then give the sign of approval. So the organization really kind of needs to be audit ready after having followed all of the steps and the phases that we've outlined in our kind of best practice framework. So once the auditors then review and approve the results, they should be able to provide some recommendations on how you can improve or how you could actually get to the next level in terms of maturity. So what can a tool do to support you? So it should be more than just a game, where we actually have some tool-based support and implementation. Here are some of the tasks that are involved, which can be supported by our tool ADONIS NP for implementing an operational risk system and an internal control system, where you need to move step by step up the maturity ladder, which we have seen. So in the documentation phase, this is where you would only need ADONIS NP, where it's possible to document your risks and controls, group the risks together, and then also connect your assets to the risks that you have defined before you then go and perform the necessary risk and control assessments. But to move to the ongoing evaluation stage in the ladder, this is where BOC would offer you the GRC advanced service together with ADONIS NP, where you can have tool support for the evaluation dialogues for your risk and controls, where a history of previous evaluations will be available as an audit trail, and then you can see what's actually happened over a period of time, so kind of year on year what the changes have been made. And here we can also provide user and role specific dashboards with kind of access rights on the repository, so that it's kind of easier and more targeted for the asset owners and the various stakeholders to actually go into ADONIS and actually perform their daily tasks as easily and as quickly as possible. So there's also then many reports and kind of graphical analysis, as is also available in ADONIS, but it's be more specific then in terms of the advanced GRC solution. And then to go one step further, you would have to have ADONIS NP together with the premium GRC service, which basically includes everything that the advanced GRC service has, but in addition there's workflow support and more kind of user and role specific notifications, so kind of having kind of email notifications set up that when it's time to go in and actually review your risks or to perform the assessments, it's more kind of integrated together with your daily work, so it's easier to kind of govern the whole initiative as a whole. And control implementation and audit trail support is also included, where it's possible to integrate with additional management systems. So in terms of our slides, that's just the end of what I need to show for now. So I'd like to now just take a look directly in ADONIS. So this is accessing ADONIS together with the GRC service. So I'm just going to switch it to an English language and log in here. Okay, so you may notice, if you're familiar with ADONIS NP, that we've got a couple of additional scenarios here. So we obviously have our regular scenarios like design and document, read and explore, and control and release for the actual release workflow process of ADONIS. But in addition now, we've got this governance, risk and compliance portal. So we're just going to click in here to see what we have. So by default, it opens up on our kind of dashboard here. But before we take a look at what's available here in the dashboard, I just want to have give you a quick look at how the concept is actually applied in terms of associating the risks and controls with the processes of our organization. So looking first here is just a high-level company map of our sample insurance models, and we can drill into our insurance core processes here around customer service. And we can see directly from this view here that, if I just switch back, that we have risks associated with these two processes. We've got an address change process, and we want to change the right to a life insurance benefit as a second process. So if I just click on the risk icon, we can see that it has a risk called failure in recording customer data. And if I click on our change right to insurance benefit, we also see the same risk applied to both processes. But obviously there's going to be different context and different impact in terms of how a risk can affect a specific process. So if I just open up the notebook here for this failure in recording customer data risk, we can see that this is the name of the actual risk itself. It's grouped to a risk group called process risks, but we can see here in the risk assessment chapter of the notebook that there are actually 3 risk assessments in terms of how this risk affects the various assets that they're associated with. So if we take a look first at the assets that this risk has an impact on, we can see a list of processes here. Down below we see what processes it's involved in and where the actual assigned risk in terms of task in the process where it's been assigned. So this failure in recording customer data affects many processes. Therefore, we need to provide some context in terms of assessing the risk directly on one of the actual processes, or in this case we've got 3 different risk assessments in terms of customer documentation from a beneficiary, master data, or any offerings that we provide to our potential customers. So if I open the notebook for our customer documentation here, and this time I'll just minimize our notebook here and now look at when we're assessing this risk in terms of our customer documentation and offering. We can look at the assets here and see that the scope is now reduced in terms of the impact of this risk. So rather than the generic risk, which is here, failure in recording customer data, it applies to many processes. This time, in terms of customer documentation and offering, the assets are only applying to an application and a single business process here. So it's just about adding context to both the risks that you have, but also the controls that are in place. So if I just come back to generic risk here, we can also see what required controls are here. But again, if I open up Notebook for the random test, which is the generic control, we can see here that there's a more contextualized control testing defined. So rather than just a random test, we're applying the random test on actual CRM data sets, which would apply to the failure in recording customer data. So once everything is linked in the background in both the control, the risk definition, the control definition, and both the control assessment or control testing, as well as the risk assessment, we can then get to a stage where it's possible to actually use the dashboard that we have here. So on the dashboard, what is then filtered by is my risk assessment. So any risk assessments that I have been considered responsible for as the user who I've logged in as. So in here, then you can periodically go in, and if we look at our customer documentation, we can click on the actions button here to see what's possible to perform here, and we can directly here perform a risk assessment on the customer documentation offering assessment that we have defined, and we already know what assets it's linked to, so that's how we're actually assessing the risk in this case. So it's just contextualizing the actual assessment of the risks that you already have defined. So we see an overview here of any historical information that actually can't be updated, but then to perform the assessment, you may want to say that, okay, it was 1 to 4 times last year. We've improved some of our processes, so now it's only going to really happen once every 1 to 2 years, and the impact is now low. So you can provide some documentation of the assessment, so you can maybe say what's changed over time and why the risk is now having it's less likely and it's going to have a lower impact if it actually happens. And you can also then set it up so that in maybe May 2018, we can also perform the assessment again. So we can save it. It updates the data in the background. We can now see when the next assessment is due. And it's the same for our control testing. So in this case, if we look at our random test of CRM data sets, but in this case, you're actually testing the control in terms of its design effectiveness, its operating effectiveness, whether there's any documentation. If we just go in and actually take a look at what options we have, so we could do the same to perform the control testing. Come down here and we can say, okay, the design effectiveness, again, it's improved a little bit, so it's not quite green, but it's had a yellow status. It's got a low deficiency now. We're focusing really on the accuracy of the data that's been input, and the documentation, we can say it's adequate for now. So you can also add, if there was any kind of gap or if you needed something else to be improved, you can add to the documentation, which will be available then in the kind of audit trailer or historization. And then in terms of control executions, it's basically for auditing again to say, okay, this control exists and we performed the execution on a certain date and we provided some documentation as well. So just down the very bottom then of the dashboard here, we see my assets. So what's listed here are any of the assets that are affected by any of the risk or control testings or assessments that we have here. They appear here as my assets. And likewise in this little widget here, we can see all of the risks and controls that are defined in the repository, or we can switch it back and only look at my risks and controls. And as we saw before, we've got a failure in recording the customer data. If I check the context menu, I can actually from here see, okay, I can see that there's been 3 risk assessments defined that relate to that particular risk that we have. So not only that, we can also then generate some of the other predefined reports that we can create in the administration toolkit, like the matrix views or the Gantt charts, the portfolio views, or the business impact analysis. But just as an example here, I'll take a list of our risk assessments, open up the context menu and create our portfolio view and take a look at the risk assessment in terms of the failure mode and effects analysis. So to try and get an overview of the state of each of the risk assessments that we have there in the portal, we can generate the portfolio view. And again, if you just hover over one of the little bubbles on the view here, we can see the likelihood, the impact, and the detection. And it's looking at the information from 3 perspectives. So we've got the likelihood, the impact, and then the detection here is the size of the bubble. So from here, you can also export the views to Excel or as a PDF or just as a simple image. If we export it here to Excel, we can just take a look at the results. So again, you get an overview of the risk assessments that were included in the view generation and their impact, their likelihood and detection. And on the second tab here, we can actually see an image of the view. So it'd be easy to kind of copy and paste here out to any kind of PowerPoint presentation. And then lastly, you get the legend. So you see what risk assessments were actually included in the view generation as well. So all really quite quick from the typical kind of workbench here or the list of kind of widgets and views that we have. You can also look at some of the dashboards that are available. So we've got dashboards that are specific to the risks and controls. Again, here it's looking at my risk assessment. So again, you see the list of risk assessments just on their own and together with the information when the next assessment is due. But also you see on the right-hand side what the associated assets are that have been linked to the risks that relate to the risk assessment that we have. So yeah, that's pretty much our kind of quick overview of the governance, risk and compliance topic in terms of how we support it using ADONIS NP. In our webinar next week, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the GRC service version 2.0. But for now, I'm just going to jump back to the slides real quick and talk about just the BOC Management Office as a whole. So obviously the whole idea here is to try and enable and support business transformation, looking at representing, analyzing and evaluating any of the changes in your architecture. So today we just looked at risk management, but the same kind of concept applies for all of the tools that we provide, both ADONIS and ADO-IT, looking at trying to represent both current and target architectures, be they processes or applications or infrastructures, looking at ways to kind of improve through comprehensive analysis of your as-is and to-be state. We've got graphical model comparison to compare changes or to see what's happened over time. Again, the kind of validation and release mechanisms from the release workflow, but also with the premium GRC, we can also set that up in terms of risk and controls and the assessments and testing. The graphical views, we saw just a quick portfolio view, but there's obviously other view types for assessing, identifying gaps and looking at kind of life cycle planning with the kind of Gantt charts. And then the specific stakeholder-specific dashboards where, yeah, trying to really deliver the information that's most important to your kind of end users as targeted as possible once they log in to use the tool. But yeah, for now, I'm just going to pass you back to Mike, who's going to conclude proceedings for today. But thank you very much for joining this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. All right. So as a conclusion, I would like to provide you now with an outlook on some of our upcoming webinars. As I mentioned earlier, the BOC webinars for 2017 fall within the 6 major categories that you can see on top of the slide. And below here, you can find 3 of the webinars coming in the next month or so. So the next webinar, as Tom just briefly mentioned, is going to be next week, and that's going to be an overview of our latest GRC module, so that's GRC 2.0. The next webinar after that is going to be on the 18th of May, and that's going to talk about the DMN, the decision model annotation, and really dig into the very meaning and the very usage of the DMN, and the benefits and also the drawbacks, if any, of the particular trend. And the last webinar that we have on this slide is Achieving Success in Quality, Process, and Risk Management with ISO 9001 2015. So this webinar that's going to be held on the 8th of June is going to focus on how ADONIS NP can offer just these means to implement the standard requirements like ISO 9001 and some other ones. For just a more general overview of all the webinars that we have left throughout the year, and also further details about the particular agenda, as well as more specific topics discussed, you can find that information on the website following the link below. Expanding on what we looked upon today, so as mentioned previously, we have two major platforms of the BOC Management Office, and those are ADONIS NP, focusing on BPM, and ADO-IT focusing on enterprise architecture. We saw a bit of ADONIS today with the GRC component. If you're more interested in the tools, you can find further information on the website, as well as actually see the tools, in the sense of there's one-click tryout that was going to last 10 minutes, and you can actually jump in the tool itself, play around a bit, see how it is. You can test it by getting a 30-day free trial of the particular tool, and of course you can even use it by getting in touch with our consultants, having a demo, some discussion, and then eventually, hopefully, looking into the implementation of one of those tools for your organization. So as I said, you can find more information about both tools on our website. We would like to thank you for your interest in today's webinar and for your attention today. If you have any questions and haven't typed them up already, now would be a good time to do it. In case you didn't get a chance to type up your questions, you can get in touch with us over social media, as well as the contact forms on our website, via telephone, via email, and one of our consultants will address your inquiry as soon as they can. Once more, on behalf of both Tom and myself, thank you for attending the webinar today, and we hope to be joined by you again soon. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.